welcome to Beyond the Knife, a medical history podcast brought to you by Surgeons Hall Museums, Library and Archives. We are part of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. I am Chanté, Director of Heritage and Estates at the college. Each episode, I'm joined by a guest who shares a story from the history of medicine and surgery. This episode contains discussions on topics that some people may find distressing. Please take care while listening. Desperate times tend to breed desperate measures, and in the history of medicine, that's opened the door to a strange cast of characters: self-proclaimed healers, miracle peddlers, and outright frauds. Armed with bold claims, bogus potions, and barely a trace of medical training, they sold hope to the hopeless at a price. Even as medicine advanced, bringing us anesthesia, germ theory, antibiotics, quackery didn't fade. It adapted, got louder, craftier, and sometimes shockingly successful. Today we're diving deep into the bizarre world of America's most notorious medical fakes. Joining us is Dr. Terry Simpson, surgeon, author, and culinary medicine expert, who's here to help us trace the blurry line between science and snake oil.
So, Dr. Terry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We're going to start with our warm-up question that we put to each of our guests. If you could be present at any moment in the history of medicine, what would it be and why?
Probably Joseph Bell. Bell was a very famous diagnostician, and he would be able to look at people and say, that person has a thyroid condition. Look, they've got a little bump on their neck. Look at their eyes, they're a little bit out. So he would tell that before and became kind of the inspiration for Arthur Conan Doyle's work. Well, there are all these great moments in surgery. Those moments cannot be replaced, I think, by that. The other one that I like outside of Edinburgh might be Blaylock with the Blaylock-Taussig shunt. So imagine this. We had this baby, what they used to call blue babies, had a congenital condition called tetralogy of Fallot. He had worked it out in animals with his able assistant, guy by the name of Vivian Thomas, and they did this surgery, the first surgery on a heart. And it changed this blue baby who was dying into a pink baby. And that young person lived for many, many years thereafter. So one of those two places would be great places to be in surgery.
And what's the time difference between them?
Well, that was in 1947, and the other one would have been about 1847, 1880, something like that.
So between Bell and Blaylock, those are great moments. I
I love the diagnostic techniques of Bell, and I love how he inspired Conan Doyle too.
Yeah.
And that idea of how you take those detective skills from surgery.
Right, and considering he was both Watson and Holmes at the same time, both the doctor who had the understanding and the person who had the forensics and would be able to look and observe. And because of that, surgeons are taught observation. That's a part of the whole Edinburgh School of Surgery. That's where that greatness came from, is the ability to observe and process that information.
And turning the baby from blue to pink.
Yeah.
What a moment.
Right. These were children who would die. So tetralogy of Fallot is a heart condition where the best way of saying it is the vessels are mixed up. And to be able to bypass one of those vessels and operate on the heart, because it used to be, they would say, the heart is something you can never, ever operate on. And yet Blaylock did. And Blaylock was at Hopkins, and the Johns Hopkins School had its roots in Edinburgh.
Incredible. So I think we're going to talk a lot today about that influence that passed between America and the UK, American surgeons, Edinburgh surgeons. So here at Surgeons Hall Museum, we do often spotlight that incredible progress that was made by particularly 19th century American medical communities. And so that early use of ether as pain medication by an American dentist, which then very quickly influenced surgeons here in Edinburgh. And also the fact that, in the US, we see women accessing medical education before that's happening here in the UK. But at the same time, this surprising success among medical charlatans. And so alongside these genuine medical breakthroughs, we have the fraudulent figures on the rise.
Well, let's start sort of from the beginning. America was truly the Wild West. So here was this outpost of the British Empire, and there wasn't a lot of education there, but there was a lot of need because there was a lot of illness there. And here you're on the frontier, so how are you going to fix the illness? Well, they didn't have a medical education system. And so it was started to become like, well, I know a little bit about medicine. And so you follow me for a bit. And when you're all ready to go, you can call yourself a doctor. And those were the early doctors. Now, the problem was there weren't textbooks, there wasn't YouTube, there wasn't any formal education. So these people would come up with wild ideas. Sometimes it was the best they could, but sometimes it wasn't. And in the United States, we developed what we called patent medicines. Now, patent medicines means that you would put ingredients into a bottle and you would patent it. So that gave the idea of the common person, it's legitimate. It's a patent. The U.S. government patented it. So what are they doing? What are they putting in these patent medicines? Oftentimes they would put in things like heroin, and that would give people relief of pain. Or they would put in cocaine, and that would give them this stimulus. So these people had all these patent medicines, no idea what was in them, but they felt better. And these charlatans or these patent medicine specialists would move from one county to another with these patent medicines and say, take this, come one, come all, take this. It'll take care of rheumatism, cancer, any consumption. And of course, they felt better because all of those were masking the symptoms. And there are those people who have chronic things for which we have no control over, and they would be cyclic in the nature of their illness. And it's like, I'm in a better cycle. This guy must be right. So that's where the patent medicines came in. And that's where the charlatans came in. And that was the majority, unfortunately, of American medicine for a long time.
So I know in the collection here, one of my favorite things are these copper tokens. So these are from the 1700s, and they were struck by a man named Burchell for sugar plums for worms here in the UK. So I think he was based in London, but we've got some of these worm tokens. And they've got a little hole in them, so you can attach the token to the remedy, just like you say. And I think the reason the story sticks with me is because at this time, there's, the understanding that you have worms in your body, which are bad, but also worms in your teeth that come out and, make the little holes, make the cavities. And if you eat the sugar plum, it's going to, address the problem with the worms. And I think they contained lead acetate. So, I mean, it couldn't be far from.
Yeah. Most of these medicines, we had two types of medicines mostly in the United States, those that didn't kill you and those that did. We didn't have much more. And as you know, Edinburgh was at the height of all of medicine in the 1700s and 1800s. This was the place where anatomy became foremost for surgeons. This is the place where they studied their results. This is the place where they had scientific rigor that was applied, which had not been applied to medicine. And it was from the Edinburgh School that we got the schools in Vienna and Germany, the schools in London, and it influenced the United States. So the first major medical school in the United States was the University of Pennsylvania. Its two founders, a guy by the name of William Shippen and John Morgan, both learned from the Edinburgh School. They both came here, and they brought those ideas back, and that became our first medical school in the United States. One of the founders, or one of the signatories on our Declaration of Independence, is by a physician named Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was also a person who came to Edinburgh, and he did a little bit of surgery, but mostly he's thought about as psychiatry, but everybody did everything in there. There were other individuals. The next major medical school in the United States was Johns Hopkins, which was in Baltimore. And those were founded by Welsh and Osler were the primary founders. They were trained in what they called the Edinburgh method, which was, again, scientific rigor, focused on anatomy, look at your results, analyze the results, and go forward. And that was where modern American medicine came in. Now, while you gave us modern American medicine, we gave you guys chiropractic. And we had some good points in American medicine. For example, we were a little earlier than Edinburgh at admitting women into medicine, which was a good thing. But we also had all of these strange magnetism people who magnets will influence your thing, electricity, any sort of new whiz-gangy thing that came up. People would grab a hold of that and say, let's make this into medicine. Let's explain the world by these things. The difference between a charlatan and someone who's science seems to be a thin line, but it's a very thick line in terms of evidence. And but we've had a lot of charlatans in the United States.
So that we've got actual medical breakthroughs happening alongside this idea of the cure-all that has no scientific basis. for patients, for people, what was that like? How could one determine which treatment to go with?
They couldn't. Right? The average person in the United States at that time was illiterate. And so you would come in with a patent medicine. And some people have a natural instinct for who a quack is, right? Some people, I give the benefit of the doubt to everybody. So there are people who say, oh, that's a bad person. I say, oh, they're probably fine. But some people have this innate thing like, that guy's there's something off about him. Nothing's that good. And so that was hard for a lot of people because someone comes in and says, here's this medicine, take it. Oh, I feel so much better. But ultimately, when you started looking at the results, were they better? And they weren't.
Okay. So of all the fraudsters you studied,
Yeah.
do you have a favorite? Do you have a group of favorites?
Oh, I have a group of favorites. Brinkley is probably the one that is sort of. So Brinkley was this guy who really didn't have a legitimate medical education. He went 3 years to medical school in what is now called Loyola in Chicago, couldn't pay his tuition, dropped out, went down to Tennessee. And because of that, he was able to get a license to practice. And he continued to do this. And so he kept, physicians didn't make much money in those days, but he discovered that he could make money if he would appeal to things. So ultimately he went to Kansas and he set up shop there and got his medical degree from some electric university. Basically, they just signed his name to a diploma and he became Brinkley, MD.
Okay.
And then in 1917, he was talking to this fellow and they were talking about, boy, these young goats are strong. And he says, if only I could put that goat vigor in a man, it would be something. And this young guy said, put it in me. Well, I don't know if that'll work. And so he put a goat testicle into this person. And the guy said, oh my gosh, I have vigor. I can have sex again. I can do all of these things again. I'm like a young man. And it became this huge testimonial. Well, he turned this into, literally, during the Depression, a multi-million-dollar empire, built his own hospital. And then he discovered radio waves. And he was one of the first radio people in the United States, built this large radio tower, and he would broadcast, homespun medical ideas, and people would write in and say, well, doctor, I feel a little this way, I feel a little that way. So, well, you need this tonic and you need that tonic. What he did was he got all these pharmacies together and they would put numbers on tonics. Well, you sound a little tired, ma'am. You need a little tonic number 67 and you can get it at any one of these certain shops. So these shops might sell the tonic for $10. It might just be water and Brinkley would get $1 of that $10. Then he also founded country western music because you can't just have a whole show 24 hours a day or 12 hours a day of just talking about medicine. So he would have live performers come to his studio, and this was the foundation of country western music to the farmers, and they would be singing country western music. So many famous country western music stars got onto that radio program. It was the early Nashville. But he did two things: telemedicine, he would diagnose people without it, but then he had his testicle implant shop. And in 15 minutes, he could put a goat testicle into a man, and the man went off saying they felt better.
So, Dr. Terry, put a goat testicle into a man. Where is it going?
It's going to, we know it wouldn't do well. It'll do one of two things. Your body will reject it because it's, you're not immunosuppressed, or you'll get an infection and it will pass out. But again, you rely on testimonies, right? He never followed his evidence. He never said, let's see what happens to these people. But in that field was the early days of endocrinology. So he had enough just lingo about estrogen and progesterone and hormones that he could make it sound legitimate. And so people would hear this, and then they would hear this other guy saying, I was 50 years old and I couldn't have children. And then I had this goat testicle implant and now I have 3 kids. So they relied on testimonials.
Okay. And just the implant is going
into the scrotum.
Into the scrotum. Oh my God. Okay. So he gets a degree.
Yep.
Comes up with this idea, develops a radio station.
And uses the radio station to give homespun medical ideas, for which he got a little portion of from the pharmacies. And most of them were just selling colored water and getting people to come into his clinic. And they would come in on a Monday and they could stay until Sunday. And they paid $750 during the Depression.
Wow.
Now, this was appealing to men. This was something that was appealing to men. And you can imagine there are a number of reasons that occur with impotence. Predominantly, impotence is, when you're talking about younger men, it's psychological. And also, if you can go pay $750, and in today's money, that would be like a $10,000 to $20,000 surgery. If you're going to pay that much money, are you going to tell people that it went bad and you didn't have a good outcome? So,
What happened in the end? What happened to John Brinkley?
well, the American Medical Association decided this guy is a quack. There's absolutely nothing to it. There is no way this could happen for a variety of reasons. So they started to investigate him. And Brinkley was very smart. He had a lot of political connections in Kansas. And so every time they would try to investigate him, he would have his friend who was the attorney general just quash the investigation. He would have his friends who sit on the medical board quash the investigation. But eventually it couldn't keep up. And so the AMA continued to say, this man is the number one quack in America. This is not helping. And then people would have the stuff that was sent in. They'd say, well, here's what I got from him. Sent it into the AMA. They would analyze and said, this is colored water. There's nothing to this. So eventually they all caught up with him. And he got run out of Kansas. And then he lost his radio license because he was prescribing medicine over the radio. So the FTC pulled his red license. So he put a new radio station in Mexico across the border, moved to Del Rio, Texas, and set up a new hospital and a new clinic. And instead of this time implanting goat testicles, because he was being sued now by individuals because they were having abscesses or dying or having problems, lost a lot of money suing or smelling them, he said, we're just going to inject people with goat testicle essence. And again, it was basically water that he was injecting them with. But of course, they all felt better. And it would be $10 an injection instead of $750 for a thing. $10 in the Depression was still a lot of money. So Fishbein, which was a guy who was in charge of the AMA, went after him again. And in some obscure medical journal, called him out. And it was a trap. So Brinkley said, you know what? I'm going to sue you. And that's exactly what Fishbein wanted him to do. So they went to court. And he won. Not Brinkley, Fishbein won. And then all of a sudden, the world started going bad because now it went from this obscure medical journal where if you'd realize it, nobody reads medical journals, but now it was this public spectacle. Hundreds of people went there to testify on behalf of Brinkley. Now hundreds of people learned from all the papers that he was a fraud. So he lost his money, and ultimately he had a heart attack and died 42 penniless.
42 years old.
No, in 1942.
1942. So the AMA is the American Medical Association.
Yeah.
And his downfall, apart from clearly being a truly terrible man, did he want some kind of legitimacy? Did he want a world where
he wanted it to
was
stop?
respected?
Because remember, when this didn't work, when the goat testicle thing stopped working, he then went to injecting. So he wasn't really trying science.
No.
He was interested in money. And he made, one year they estimated he made $12 million. And this is during the Depression. So here's a guy that doesn't have a legitimate medical degree, but now he's making it. So one of the things that they said about Brinkley is, if only he would have used his knowledge for good. Imagine, because he built this empire, if he would have used his knowledge for good, what he could have done in the field of medicine. Now, I've heard this about many other medical fraudsters, many of whom I've exposed on my podcasts. And the answer is, no, he couldn't have. This man didn't have a foundation in true medical science. For people like, when we look at the august bodies here, Lister, Simpson, all of these individuals, Syme, all of these individuals had a tremendous medical knowledge, a true medical school, and they built up. But fraudsters don't have that. Fraudsters are only interested in defrauding the public. He was able to defraud appealing to male ego, right? I'm not as virile as I once was. I want to be young and strong. He appealed to male ego with fraud, never checked his results. And so instead of taking years of, think about Lister. It took 10 years before Lister finally published his results and said, I think we've got something here. And I think this is how we do it. And you guys might want to try that. Well, that stood the test of time. Brinkley, like many other common American fraudsters or fraudsters everywhere, they didn't care. Their only care was the buck. And they sound like they're so legitimate. Today, medical fraudsters do it by cherry-picking data. For example, they'll say, well, this study showed this. And even though there might be 100,000 other patients showing the opposite thing, they will cherry-pick data. So you think, why don't they cherry-pick the good data? And the answer is, they only will cherry-pick data because they're only interested in getting the dollar for what they're getting. That's their motivation. Their motivation isn't pure science. Their motivation isn't the betterment of mankind. Their motivation is taking advantage of sick people to get money from them. And they will never, ever be, in any ways, a person who will advance medical science at all. But They all live with that. This is what the AMA won't tell you. This is what Edinburgh won't tell you. These people won't tell you that we have the cure for cancer or the cure for the common cold or take this echinacea or do this herb. They won't tell you that it hasn't been tested, or if it's been tested, it's wrong. But people love being special. Oh, this guy has the cure. And then they explain it so logically. Imagine Brinkley coming in, patient coming in to Brinkley. Well, I'm 55 years old. I'm tired. I can't have, intercourse anymore. I'd love to have children. I just don't. Well, you need this goat testicle. It has these hormones. Enough medical jingoism that it sounds legitimate to the person, but it's a total fraud. And today we have this too. And just to give you an idea, so Lister, as we know, is one of the heroes here, discovered that germs cause problems. And he was good friend with Louis Pasteur. Well, during the same time in the United States, we had a president who was assassinated, James Garfield, in 1880. He had a surgeon take care of him by the name of D. Willard Bliss. D stood for doctor, so he called himself Doctor. He did not believe in the germ theory. So when Garfield was shot, Garfield didn't immediately die. He probably, if nobody would have done anything to him, he would have probably recovered. His bullet ended up lodging in his spine, really didn't do anything other than the initial impact. Bliss went in time after time to try and get that bullet out, made multiple tracks in his body with his bare hands or with instruments that were unwashed. And over 70 days later, Garfield, losing over 100 pounds, ended up dying at his summer home in Long Branch, New Jersey. He didn't die from the gunshot wound, even though they executed the man who shot him. He died from medical malpractice of a guy who didn't believe in the germ theory, even though that was widely available. Then that guy, Willard Bliss, charged the United States government $25,000, which in the 1880s was a lot of money. Congress settled for him for $6,500, which you can imagine how much money that would be today. So he was another medical fraudster that defrauded, and you can imagine the American president getting defrauded by this man. The next assassination occurred 20 years later with William McKinley. We had learned some lessons with William McKinley, right? So with William McKinley, we had learned we had learned about antisepsis and asepsis. So McKinley is shot. He's at the World's Fair in New York. They take him immediately into a makeshift operating room that has electricity and lights. They open him up, they operate, they find the bullet, they sew up the stomach, they take it out. He is discharged that day. What we didn't have at that time was in the IV, so he ends up with pancreatitis. And because of pancreatitis, he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, and he ultimately withered away and died. Years later, we have Ronald Reagan, who was shot coming out of the Hilton Hotel by John Hinckley. He walks into the trauma room at George Washington University. They have the ICU. They have the ventilator. He has holes in his lung. He is discharged 12 days later and lives on for many years afterwards. So the progress of medicine and surgery continued, but we always still have to watch out for the fraudsters.
So that the ability for people to manipulate right back from the 1700s that we started with up to today, you touched on it earlier, that idea that it's either a conspiracy theory, so the medical associations don't want you to know that there is actually this cure, or it's cutting edge science that hasn't yet been fully understood or discovered yet. Is that how it works today? All the wellness trends we see?
They all do. So we sort of look at it like this. There are a lot of surgeons that were fraudsters. Another one of my favorites is John Harvey Kellogg. Now, we hear about Kellogg's cereal. That was his brother, William Kellogg. They fought over that. But John Harvey Kellogg was a trained surgeon. He actually did some training at St. Mark's Hospital and was a very good surgeon. William Mayo also trained with him. Again, the training, they would come over to the UK for training. And he would always say, we always could tell Kellogg's surgery because he had a nice, neat surgery, a small incision, a good surgeon. But he had this entire sanatorium where he believed that, colon stasis was the problem with all disease. So he had people taking yogurt enemas 3 or 4 times a day, and people bought this nonsense. So this was, again, a fraudster who, Taft went to his sanitarium, which President Taft, he was the president after Theodore Roosevelt. Amelia Earhart, of course, she always lost her way. She went to the sanitarium, and many famous people went to the sanitarium, mostly because they were just kind of overworked or tired, and they were subject to eating granola and having yogurt enemas and thinking this was going to cure their common problems. So fraudsters rely on people who have chronic, not acute problems, things that they would complain about and things that are cyclical. So how do you tell a fraudster? How do we tell them in medicine? Well, number one, they don't really listen to scientific community, but instead they say, this is what doctors don't want you to know, right? Number two, there's huge profit motive. And when there's a profit motive, you can always tell. The hucksters make millions of dollars. Your average surgeon might do well, but they're not making millions of dollars. They're getting paid for their knowledge. They're getting paid for their ability. They're getting paid for their skill, but they're not getting paid millions of dollars to sell you a beef heart supplement. And we have them today. I'll give you some examples in American medicine. In surgery today, if you go to an orthopedic surgeon in America, someone might say, we're going to spin your platelets, one of your blood components, and we're going to inject them back into your knee or your shoulder, wherever we're operating on. Insurance doesn't cover this, and it'll cost you an extra couple of $1,000s, which you'll have to pay for, which your insurance won't. So I have a very good friend who's normally sort of skeptic, and I said, I don't think you need that. Well, they said my shoulder will recover and I can play tennis faster. So she ended up paying a couple of $1,000s for this nonsense.
Spin your platelets.
Right. They'd say, well, it has, and see, they have the jargon, platelet-derived growth factor. Now, if you look and say, well, have there been tests about this? Has this been tested? Well, it has been, and there's no difference between putting saline in and putting this platelet-derived, these platelets that are spun down and concentrated. No difference at all. But then the surgeon will say, as the authority figure wearing the white jacket, well, it works in my patients and I have all this. So instead of trials, they have testimonials. And that's how the huckster works. Trials instead of testimonials, high profit items, no evidence, cherry picking the evidence. And kind of like the saying is, when the blade is guided by evidence, it's medicine. When the blade is guided by profit, it's theater.
It's theater. I like that. So there are surgeons, there are medical professionals then that can, lead people down the wrong path, the example you just gave. And then in the world of social media today, I feel like my algorithm, so I am 45 years old. So I'm a middle-aged woman, heading into menopause. I feel like my algorithm is constantly filled with how much protein I should eat, how I need to weight lifts, how I need to take these supplements. And yeah, if I take this oil, then that will absolutely help my hormones. And it is extraordinary. But these don't even feel like they are backed by medical knowledge in any way. It feels kind of blatantly just wellness.
Yes. Well, first of all, part of the problem with medicine is we have ignored women for years. And we got it wrong on menopause very early on. We misinterpreted data. So this is on the scientific side, where we were very concerned about hormonal treatment leading to increased risk of breast cancer, increased risk of other forms of cancer, increased risk of thromboembolic events, meaning blood clot in the leg that can go to your lung. We misinterpreted the data upon reinterpretation. And so for 20 years, women weren't getting what they needed, which was hormonal treatment for menopause and their symptoms. There's certain exceptions to that, obviously, and so women weren't getting this treatment. So that brought on a different group of hucksters. That brought on a group of hucksters said, come to us, we will give you these pellets under your skin, which are soaked with hormones. And they had hormones, but they weren't regulated. So sometimes women would get 10 times the amount of hormone they should or not. Today, thankfully, we now have really good therapy for women through menopause. We have hormonal patches, which are virtually free that you can get from the pharmacy, progesterone, if they need testosterone. But yes, on the social media platforms, there are tons of misinformation about menopause and perimenopause. And you're right, buy this collagen, buy this protein powder, buy this supplement, buy the CoQ10, buy the vitamins, do this exercise. No, don't do that exercise, do the other exercise. And when you say, well, what's the science behind it? It's slim to none.
And I think the interesting thing is it's presented in a way where even asking the question, what's the science behind it, isn't in the forefront of your mind.
Right.
So
You're looking at relief.
Yeah.
Right? Consider, we have always looked at hucksters from giving relief.
That's such a good point.
Either whether it's the, cocaine and heroin in a bottle to make you have pain relief but give you energy versus, take this pill and it will make you better, whether it's psychological or real based on that, but it's never lasting.
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually. So even that promise of pain relief right from the 1700s through today is what makes it so attractive.
Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to get caught up in it. For example, last year before, was at Chelsea's Garden in London. And so I was looking at one of these Mexican plants from which you can get one of the hormones for a form of estrogen. Now, plenty of people sell the cream from that plant. The problem is we human beings do not have the enzyme to break that down into usable hormones. So you can buy that cream. It will do you no good whatsoever. But when I was showing this cream, and even though on my TikTok I said, this doesn't work in humans, half of the comments, because most people only watch the first 4 seconds, half of the comments, where can I get this cream? And people say, you can get this cream from this person. Now I have to delete those because I don't want people getting nonsense. But that's what happens. People see little bits. And it's like, I want something natural. Natural has to be better.
I guess that goes back to the Kellogg's yogurt enemas.
Right.
I'm guessing. So.
This is natural. There was a famous Edinburgh surgeon named Arbuthnot who also believed in colon stasis. And he actually became a baron. He took out tons of colons in London because he believed all disease came from colons and stuff sitting in colons and rotting. So he did all these partial colectomies. And when you start operating on poor indications, you typically get poor results.
So let's say I'm looking at Instagram and I'm on there for at least 40 minutes.
Sure.
And the algorithms.
Now you're bragging, only 40 minutes.
Only 40 minutes. What do I do? How do I not fall for it?
Well, it's hard because you should see your physician. At the end of my podcast on Fork You, I always say, I am not your physician. If you're going to see someone and change it, please see your physician. They want you not to see a physician, right? They want to say this. First of all, if someone says this is a cure they don't know about or they don't want you to know, it's a fraud. Secondly, if they say, well, all of the evidence of the world points that way, but I have something different, it's going to be a fraud. And if you can't take it to your physician and say, well, is this true? Should I have this? Now, sometimes your physician may not know the answer. They may send you to a registered dietitian and say, well, you know what? Let's see if we can improve your diet a little bit. Let's see if we can do a little bit of these things. But sometimes they will have true answers for you as opposed to the fraudsters are out there.
And I think I know as well, we touched on people that work in the medical profession, the example of the platelets who might not be necessarily sharing the most relevant medical information. And sometimes as patients, we have to be able to put the tough questions to our doctors, to our physicians to say, what will this do for me? How will this help? And it's hard. It's hard to be in a surgery and be able to speak to the person in the white coat and say, really?
We're an intimidating group. I mean, surgeons are very intimidating. We always have been because, we have the arrogance of having to operate on the human body. But we have our own set. For example, we used to do knee surgeries for arthritis, right? You had pain in your knee. You would go to the surgeon. He would put a scope in your knee, wash things out, and say, oh, things are better. When we did actual studies looking at that, it was no better than physical therapy or exercise. So we hopefully don't do that anymore. Another example, we used to do an operation where we tie off the internal mammary artery for angina. Didn't do it. Hopefully improve the collateral circulation of the heart. That was long ago before we could operate on the heart because that was the only thing we do. It didn't help any. So we have all of these sorts of different things that we have done in the past that when we put them to science, we can say this doesn't work. Back surgeries. If you don't have instability of your back, of your lower spine, then doing something to stabilize the spine won't help with lower back pain. All of us have lower back pain. It's a problem of being on the planet Earth and having gravity and walking upright and sitting too long and not moving. But again, when they look at the studies, when they started looking at it, said, this doesn't work any better than physical exercise. But the motive in the surgeon to do the operation, to get the money, it's hard for them to say, you know what, we were wrong and we don't do that anymore.
So do you think whether we're looking at social media or in a consultation, the right thing is to ask the questions?
What does the evidence show?
Yeah.
And when they start equivocating, well, some of the evidence does and some of the evidence doesn't, then you're having a problem. Physicians today have to be influencers of their patients. So I get medical questions asked me all the time, and I really had to stop my DMs because I was getting too many medical questions because I can't answer them. I'm not their doctor. They'll send me a lab test. What does this tell me? And it's like, you need to see your doctor because I can't tell you. I'm not examining you. I don't see you. I'm not being James Bell. I can't just look at you because you're not there. But a doctor has to be a medical influencer with their patient because I know if you're my patient and you come to be, you're in perimenopause and you say, I'm getting hot flashes. What should I do? And I'll say, here's a patch. Here's a pill. And if I just send this to you and send you on your way, I know you're going to do the following. You're going to Google, you're going to chat GTP, you're going to open evidence, you're going to look at all of those things to find out. And that's great. You're going to ask your aunt, your uncle. You won't ask your uncle about perimenopause, I bet, unless he was a she. You're going to ask whomever, and I expect that. Now, some doctors get upset. You should only trust my advice in this very paternalistic way. That has to be gone. I have to be your influencer. I have to be able to say, you know what? This is what you're going through. This is the science behind it. This is covered by NHS. You don't need to buy U cream. You don't need to buy this, that, or the other thing. This is covered. But you will find all of these other things on social media. You will find people saying this, that, and the other thing. You'll find people saying this, that, and the other thing. And this is the evidence. If you have any questions, you can always come back to me, come back to my assistant, and we'll talk about it. Those are the kind of medical influencers we need to be, because we live in an era where there's too many people who are sellers of supplements and scams on the internet.
I like that, though. I like that shift in terms of the profession. So there's recognition that people are going to look to these things.
Yeah.
Like you say, put it into ChatGPT, ask their relatives. That's okay.
And ChatGPT will be wrong.
Yeah. So we are recording this episode, Dr. Terry, in a medical museum, one of the greatest medical museums in the world. What do you think our role is as in institutions like this?
You show the good and bad of what we do, unabashedly the good and bad. And this is our conscious. This museum is, our conscious is part of our memory. So this is our surgical conscious. We can see what it takes to get what we call a breakthrough. A breakthrough comes from a prepared mind. Lister didn't come up and all of a sudden say it's bacteria. He had years of studying. He had a microscope since the time he was a kid. So that reminds us that it takes hard work to get here. But also we can see evidence of shysters, evidence of people who did things that just didn't work out. And we can see where we made mistakes. It's like we don't do things that way anymore because we have evolved. So we see the ever-evolution. So the surgical history gives us a sense of where we are, where we're going, what we did wrong, and that we didn't just get there by saying, oh, we have all the answers and everybody else was wrong.
Yeah, I think for me, the most remarkable thing about collections like these is that there are so many stories to tell. There is so much physical evidence dating back over centuries of different discoveries, but also different people, right? So there are the stories of the surgeons that were sometimes good, they were sometimes bad, they were at times a mix of both, striving to find different medical treatments. And then the stories of the people, of the patients, of people living with extraordinary disease, people who had accidents, who had to manage these levels of pain with the medical treatment available. Also, that, we have only surfaced a tiny amount of these stories. We have these extensive collections, and there is so much work to do, an infinite amount of work to really research, study, understand, and share these stories, which is a wonderful task to have.
Well, it's been my honor to be here because this is where true American medicine came from. Evidence-based medicine came out of this school. The best surgical educations came out of this school, and we fostered them back in the United States. And we had to deal with our own charlatans and continue. I mean, one of my favorite things is slapping down charlatans on my TikTok and Instagram accounts. But we still have to continue to do that. We as surgeons have to advocate for our patients, not just you as my patient, but the community as my patient. So coming here has been like going to Mecca. It is like coming here to seeing where it began and where it's continued. And so it's just been an honor.
I'm so pleased you enjoyed your visit. Dr. Terry, you have a series of social media platforms and you are really engaging with global communities now. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's meant for you as a person, but also you as a professional surgeon?
Well, my own practice is just fine. And I don't take patients off of social media. And when people contact me, said I don't take private patients. But no, I think that the real mission is to try and keep people understanding to avoid the frauds. And there are so many of them out there. Some of them are well-meaning. There's some people who are well-meaning. They'll say like, you should have all the salt you want because you sweat salt. And it's like, no, that's not the evidence. And the difference is well-meaning people, when you correct them with evidence, will be fine, but they won't. I've corrected myself. I slapped myself a couple of times when I've then had the wrong information. But I think that is trying to bring that to everybody, because not everybody will feel comfortable going to their doctor. And you want to have legitimate sources of information. And just like when I endorse something, like I use a certain little blender and I said, oh my gosh, this is great. I don't get paid for it, but it's like I endorse it. It's like, so
Yeah, I think in one of your podcasts you talk about your local coffee shop, and you say they don't sponsor you. You certainly sponsor them, given how much coffee you buy. That resonated with me because I have a similar coffee shop.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Terry. That was great.
Truly my pleasure. Truly my pleasure. And it's just like I said, it is an honor being here. It's like you get here and you get to see the shoulders of the giants that we're able to stand on and see the world as we see it, because this is where it came from. This was the zenith of surgery that brought it to America. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Knife, a medical history podcast brought to you by Surgeons Hall Museums, Library and Archives. To find out more about us, you can visit www.museum.rcsed.ac.uk. You can also follow us on our social media channels. Join us wherever you get your podcasts.